Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Donald March. I'm the president of the Mamaroneck Historical Society. I would like to welcome you to our October 2000 Historical Society program called Time and Again. Tonight we're going to have a special focus. The year is 1900, and we're going to focus on the full dinner campaign for the presidential election that happened in that year. Ladies and gentlemen, running for president is the central right of our American political order. Choosing our chief magistrate has always been the whole point of the quadrennial election since the founding of our republic. However, candidates actually running for the highest office in the land, that was a development unforeseen by the men who framed our Constitution. Indeed, partisan competition was not at all their original intent. They envisioned a patriotic president who would stand above party and factoids. Someone who would represent everyone, offering the nation nonpartisan leadership, virtuously dedicated to the common good. The ideal of the patriot president was soon endangered by fractionalism, and fractionalism's ugly offspring, the demagogue. George Washington, in his farewell address, solemnly warned his countrymen against the baneful effects of the spirit of the party. That spirit, Washington conceded, was inseparable from our nature. But for popular government, it was, quote, truly their worst enemy. The alternate domination of one faction over another, Washington said, would lead in the end to formal and permanent despotism. The eruption of partisanship, in defiance of such august counsel, argues that party competition might well serve functional necessities in the democratic republic. Henry David Thoreau cared little for politics, but saw the point. He said, politics is as it were, the gizzard of society, full of grit and gravel, and the two political parties are its opposite halves, which grind on each other. Furthermore, in those faraway days, before the advent of baseball, football, movies, and radio, party competition was a great source of entertainment. Rising from the bottom up, political parties forced themselves into political life. Yet for half a century, the first dozen United States presidents held themselves above party. In the 1828 election, Andrew Jackson legitimized party politics and opened a new political era. The mentor and counselor for Andrew Jackson's election was New York's Martin Van Buren, who was the architect of the role of parties in the American democracy. By the time Van Buren succeeded Jackson as president in 1837, parties were an entrenched instrument in the American self-government. In Van Buren's own words, party battles rouse the sluggish to exertion, give increased energy to the most active intellect, excite a salutary vigilance over our public functionaries, and prevent that apathy which has proved the ruin of republics. Apathy may indeed have proved the ruin of republics, but rousing the sluggish to exertion proved, ironically, the ruin of Van Buren himself. The architect of the American party system became the first casualty of the razzle-dazzle campaign style that developed next. The Whig Party's Tippecanoe and Tyler II campaign of 1840 transmuted the Democratic Van Buren into a gilded aristocrat, assuring his defeat in 1840. Peddling for popularity would now become standard in all future campaigns. However, the new methods were forbidden to the candidates themselves. Occasionally, candidates declared their principles via letters published in newspapers, but party surrogates did most of the hard work. Party managers preferred to let the party platform speak loudest on the issues while presenting their nominee as a candidate of all things to all people. Candidates largely remained silent during campaigns through the year 1868. From 1868 through 1884, candidates made occasional speeches, but in 1896, William Jennings Bryan stumped the country traveling 18,000 miles by train and gave 600 speeches, more than any candidate before him. The era of the whistle-stop campaign with a candidate traveling to the people had begun. Respectable opinion of the day favored the front porch campaign that had become popular since 1880. In this style of campaigning, candidates received and addressed numerous delegations at their homes. President McKinley had employed the front porch campaign favorably against William Jennings Bryan in the election of 1896. 4 years later, McKinley once again found himself campaigning for re-election, this time from his front porch, while William Jennings Bryan once again whistle-stopped across America trying to unseat him. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the campaign highlights of the 1900 presidential campaign. 1900. With the new wonders of pyrotechnics and ballyhoo, parties mobilized the electorate as never before. Politics was not a science of government. It had become the art of winning elections. Sentiment was so high in 1900 that 70% of the registered voters voted in that election. Yet, if the election of 1900 had been a piece of music, it would have been best described as a theme with variations. The Republicans met in Philadelphia that year and renominated William McKinley with no opposition. The vice presidential slot had to be filled. Garrett Hobart, the sitting vice president, elected with McKinley in 1896, had died in office. The patriotic afterglow of the Spanish-American War and Theodore Roosevelt's well-publicized heroism in that war seemed to thrust him to the forefront of the vice presidential nomination. He was just 41 years old. He had just won the governorship of the state of New York in 1898. Roosevelt relished the challenges of the state office, and he discouraged friends and supporters and well-wishers from pushing him for the vice presidential nomination on the Republican ticket. However, Senator Thomas Platt, the Republican Party boss in the state of New York, wanted to kick the independent-minded governor upstairs. What's more, rank-and-file Republicans yearned for the dynamic presence of this individual on the campaign trail. The only reservation about Roosevelt came from McKinley's right-hand man, Senator Mark Hanna, who you might remember from the last lecture I gave you 4 years ago was the campaign manager in McKinley's election in 1896. Mark Hanna warned, "Don't any of you realize that there's only one life between that madman and the presidency?" Even this intimation on presidential mortality could not deter glamour-hungry Republicans from their heart's desire in 1900. By a vote of 925 to 1, Theodore Roosevelt was nominated vice president. The lone vote at the convention against his nomination was cast by none other than Theodore Roosevelt himself. The Democrats convened in Kansas City that same year, and William Jennings Bryan was unanimously nominated for president on the first ballot. Adlai Stevenson was chosen Bryan's running mate. He had been President Grover Cleveland's vice president in his second administration. This Adlai Stevenson remains a notable figure in American history primarily because he was the grandfather of the namesake Illinois governor who ran for president twice in the 1950s, who, by the way, just happened to be born in 1900. Notwithstanding the Democratic challenger and the Republican vice presidential newcomer's high public profile, real mastery of the campaign never departed from the frontrunner, William McKinley. Honoring the taboo against incumbents campaigning, he divided his time equally between the White House and his front porch in Canton, Ohio, remaining largely aloof. Roosevelt's presence on the Republican ticket made personal campaigning a two-sided major party affair for the first time in American political history. He more than matched Bryan's energy, zeal, and persistence, but deliberately did not polish his platform style. Roosevelt had little need for expository skills. He drew and swayed crowds through the vividness of his personality. His nickname Teddy and Rough Rider preceded him, while the impressions made spread after him through newspapers and magazines. Radio and television lay far in the future, and newsreels remained Nickelodeon novelties in 1900, but photographs and cartoons augmented written descriptions to invest Roosevelt with a sort of public recognition that would later characterize and bedevil American politics itself. The 1900 election campaign stressed domestic concerns. However, it was the first presidential election since 1844 to feature foreign policy as an important issue. However, Mark Hanna, that name comes back again, the Republican national chairman, wanted to downplay any issue whatsoever that had to do with foreign policy. Issues that arose out of the Spanish-American War and the acquisition of colonial possessions in Puerto Rico, Guam, and the controversial Philippines worked against the themes the Republicans felt they needed to stress to win. William Jennings Bryan already commanded an unyielding grip on the credit-starved southern states and the silver-producing mountain states. Imperialism and the sins of Republican colonialism was a theme that Bryan and Stevenson hit hard and relentlessly. Bryan asked the voters to choose between a republic and an empire. The implicit contradiction between our Declaration of Independence and colonial rule was an issue warranting debate, but masterfully sidestepped, deflected by McKinley, who declined to answer any of those charges whatsoever. Bryan's theme of anti-imperialism may not have caught fire in 1900, but it would be an important reoccurring issue in future 20th century foreign policy debates and presidential elections. Symbolically, the Democrats selected a three-leaf clover as a representation for their three main issues in this campaign and presidential election of 1900. Their three main issues were: one leaf was for anti-imperialism, the second leaf was for anti-gold, the third leaf was for antitrust. Bryan believed the explosive growth of business during McKinley's presidency made the 1900 election a contest between democracy and plutocracy. Bryan portrayed himself as a common man, and in his speeches he would literally arraign his opponents for aiding and abetting the cancerous growth of trusts and business, combinations via their protective tariffs, non-enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act, labor injunctions, lack of real railroad regulations, deafness to the pleas for an income tax, and for corporate taxes as well. And support for the root of these evils came from the gold standard itself. Bryan's positions on anti-imperialism and his antitrust ideology, set forth in 1900, established both of these issues as the dominant concerns in American politics for the years right up until World War I. Fortunately for McKinley, Roosevelt, as governor of the state of New York, from 1899 until 1900, had tried to regulate corporations doing business in New York State. Roosevelt's antitrust sentiments had largely convinced the Republican Party hierarchy in New York to ease him out of his governor's chair and to kick him into the vice presidency, where he would be safe and out of the way. Instead, Roosevelt became the perfect foil to deflect Bryan's antitrust messages, while also making them comfortable with the colonial outcomes of the Spanish-American War. When voters went to the polls on November the 6th, 1900, continuation and majority contentment prevailed. The Republicans cleverly chose the full dinner pail to portray prosperity, while also serving to identify both McKinley and Roosevelt with the working man. Prosperity and patriotism helped to re-elect a popular president and a fresh new face for his running mate. As always, the present was pregnant with future actors and concerns. Yet it was fitting that the new century did not formally open until 1901, because this election savored more of the end of the 19th century than the beginning of the 20th. Here in Mamaroneck, the vote count on the evening of November the 6th, 1900, was as following. 1 vote for the Prohibitionist candidate, 3 votes for the Socialist Democratic candidate, no votes for Eugene Debs and the Socialist Party, which made their first run for the White House as a major party in the year 1900. No votes for the Socialists. 329 votes for the Democratic ticket led by Bryan and Stevenson. And McKinley and Roosevelt received a whopping 502 votes here in Mamaroneck in 1900. 6 months after his inauguration, McKinley was in Buffalo for the Pan American Exposition. Eager to shake hands with those waiting in line, even though he had been warned of the danger, the president reached out to a 28-year-old unemployed laborer who just happened to be an anarchist. Before his eyes, the man's hand became a gun. McKinley died September the 14th, 1900. "Now look," barked Mark Hanna, "that damned cowboy is President of the United States." Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my lecture remarks, but I'd like to share some visuals with you about the 1900 campaign. And I'd like to call your attention to the wall over here, where we have a rather interesting display. Of course, this is a great rendition. This is a campaign button rendition of Roosevelt and McKinley. Of course, if you'll notice, the background on all the Republican campaign pieces largely is colored gold, because they were in support of the gold standard. McKinley and Roosevelt are shown with a horseman at the bottom. That horseman represents a Rough Rider, and obviously Roosevelt's connection to the Spanish-American War. One of my favorite pieces, my absolute favorite pieces, is this lantern. Believe it or not, this is a lantern made out of tin, and it shows the name McKinley and Roosevelt has been punched through it. And the candle would go inside the tin, and this is what they would use for evening campaign torchlight rallies. By the way, torchlight campaigning was a staple in American politics from the 1840 actually, through 1900. 1900 was the last torchlight campaign, unfortunately. In the year 1900, on May the 28th exactly, there was a total solar eclipse that was visible in the United States. And one of the most popular campaign buttons for both sides was a figure of the sun being the victor. Whoever they felt was going to win the election would be the victor, the larger of the two, eclipsing the opponent. So here you have McKinley eclipsing Bryan, and it says, "Partial eclipse will be total in November." So that was one of my absolute favorite ones. I thought that was so just very ingenious. They were very ingenious how they did their pieces. Again, this is a celluloid campaign piece. Here you have a 1900 campaign poster, a rendition of a campaign poster that shows economic desolation, fiscal chaos, Spanish tyranny in Cuba, all under the Democrats, by the way, with American prosperity, Cuban liberty, and a new world order under the American flag and William McKinley's presidency. And it says right on top, "The administration's promises have been kept." 1896, factories in disrepair, factories smoking up a storm here in 1900. Of course, it was a war economy. Think about it. The Spanish-American War set things going. And down here you have a cute book. It's an anti-Republican book. It's a cartoon book by Freddie Opper showing McKinley and Roosevelt as unruly children being controlled by big business. Over here you have a glass canteen with a roped handle, which word had it was very popular campaign rallies for a little bit of brandy. You know, they would keep that in there. Of course, it was a canteen. It was nothing, just for medicinal purposes. You understand. And we have over here, the next one is a whole bunch of campaign pieces that show a connection with Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. This is an advertisement that actually was on the cover of January Scribner's magazine. Price was 25 cents. That associates Roosevelt with the Rough Riders. His whole story was told in advance of the campaign. And here is a cotton banner that shows Roosevelt as the vice presidential candidate in full uniform from the Spanish-American War. And here we have a brass shell badge that says "Vote for the Rough Riders." And here's a celluloid button with Roosevelt in his Rough Rider uniform. And then we get to the next one. These were very popular at the time. These were embossed celluloid covered photographic album covers. This would be the cover of your photographic album in that year, and you stick your family's photographs in for 1900. So it obviously was one for Bryan and there's one for McKinley. And this was a glass tumbler that had the etchings of the candidates in it. And this is a porcelain plate that was hand-painted with McKinley's portrait. And we get into the more elaborate things that were done. Tin was very popular. Tin was coming in at the time. It was very popular. These were all tin serving trays that are shown here as they were pictured. And it had compliments of the clothing house, whatever. So these were the equivalent of a favor that you would get when you went to a business. They would pass one out. And here's a celluloid button that, by the way, McKinley was the last American president that had served in the Civil War. So here, this shows clearly, McKinley's association with Grant and Lincoln and Washington going all the way back. But it's the direct association of McKinley with the Civil War. And of course, these are various patriotic themes of McKinley and prosperity and patriotism and prosperity. And here's a good one. This one's a rendition of the American flag. It had 45 stars. One country, one flag, prosperity at home, prestige abroad. Okay, and then we get to the next one. Here's a McKinley ribbon and badge with a celluloid attachment, and a McKinley poster with him clearly standing on something called sound money. You can't see that maybe from where you're sitting, but he's standing on a gold coin that says sound money. Prosperity at home, prestige abroad, civilization and commerce. And here's McKinley linked with John C. Fremont, the first Republican presidential candidate in 1856, and McKinley's association with Lincoln. Okay, here's a photograph of a group of young women showing their support for Bryan. They wear a variety of campaign buttons and badges and bandanas, and of course have a very prominent poster of Bryan right in the middle. Here's another rendition, a Bryan ribbon with an interesting slogan that says, "I am for Bryan and American manhood." Now here's the exact opposite button than the one that was pictured earlier on. This is a silver background button. It's Bryan and Stevenson. And instead of having the fancy Rough Rider underneath it, you have a ratio of 16:1 in gold and silver coins. And of course, Bryan was an advocate of cheapening the money supply and making it possible for farmers to repay their debts with cheaper dollars. And he was a strong advocate of minting more silver coins in a ratio of 16:1. And that's also shown here. And this is one of the most cleverest campaign pieces from the 1900 campaign, other than the eclipse button. This shows Bryan's face superimposed on a clock. And if you look at the hands, they're set at exactly 16:1. Okay, and then we get down here to some of these other ones. This was the most popular Bryan campaign poster in the campaign. This showed his three themes, depicting him as the apostle of free silver, an opponent of imperialism, and showed this octopus, which it represents the trusts that were engulfing America and sapping the money out of the people's pockets. And of course, that shows that big silver dollar right there in the middle. And of course, the Statue of Liberty and Cuba Libre, but that it's sent set in a tone that shows that it's not in America's best interest to be involved. Anti-imperialism. And over here we have, from 1896 to 1912, William Jennings Bryan is depicted in many different forms here, but he was the tantamount leader of the Democratic Party from 1896 to 1912. Okay, now we get down to this one, and here's some celluloid campaign buttons. I don't know if the camera can get any of these, but some of these are real interesting. But they really all have the same theme. Each one of these pins has a full dinner pail on it. And it's the kind of dinner pail that the workers would carry to and from work, and obviously they would carry their paycheck home in it, and they were all full. And here's a good one. This one has a full dinner pail shaped as a factory, and it says, "Do you smoke?" And of course the factory is bellowing smoke. Yes, that's what McKinley promised. There's another one just like this that says, "Yes, since 1896. That's a classic campaign piece. And here's another one of a gold background, full dinner pail, gold background, full dinner pail. And this rendition of a dinner pail which says McKinley and Roosevelt, 4 more years of the full dinner pail. And here's a dinner pail that was circulated as an inkwell. It would pop up the top, you dip your quill in, and you would write your correspondence. These are covers of Judge magazine, which is very popular at the time, that shows McKinley and Roosevelt. It's about, the campaign's about money. Nothing's changed in all these years. And each of them is pictured as a dollar bill. Bill McKinley or Bill Bryan, it's still a dollar bill. And over here it shows the cover of Judge magazine, which is the one I selected for the cover of this month's newsletter, which shows the full dinner pail and McKinley and Roosevelt as victors. Up here are some advertisements showing McKinley and Bryan examining presidential suspenders. The company ran a contest to guess who would win the popular vote, and a proof of purchase had to be included for people to get their prize. And prizes were substantial by 1900 standards. Leading prize for guessing who would come in first was $1,500. Okay, and then we come down. I'm going to come down here to some other things. This is a rendition of what a silk bandana looked like that shows Lincoln, who was a martyred president, Garfield, who was assassinated in 1881, and now, of course, McKinley, who was also a victim of assassins. And that's exactly the title of that bandana. It's called All Presidential Victims of Assassins. And down here are some items commemorating McKinley's visit to the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, which is where he was shot. And the last panel, actually second from the last panel here, shows a picture of what the Pan American Exposition was like. And this is exactly the building in which McKinley was shot. And he was shot on September the 6th, 1901. And he lingered until September the 14th, 1901. And here are some memorial celluloid buttons in McKinley's memory after he had passed on. An interesting piece from the campaign. As they say, sometimes the most loudest voice is the voice that speaks to people from the grave. This staunch Democrat died before Election Day in 1900. And he had put on his tombstone, "Kind friends I've left behind, cast your vote for Jennings Bryan." Now that's what you call a loyal Democrat. Put that right on his tombstone. I'd like to call your attention to some items I have of a nature that will be of interest to you. After tonight's discussion, you might want to take a peek at them, but for the folks at home, I'd like to bring you up to the front for some visuals. I hope the camera can follow me. This is kind of in chronological order. This is a veteran's badge from the Spanish-American War. And the popular tide in America really did support the war in 1898. And here are some buttons that folks wore on their lapels and show support of the United States in its efforts in the war against Spain. And each of them shows the sunken battleship Maine, which was sunk in Havana's harbor, which is the spark that triggered the war. This is an interesting picture. This is President McKinley. This is an actual picture from life. It's out of our archives that shows President McKinley in his rocking chair on his property in Canton, Ohio, ready to receive delegations that would come to wish him well in his re-election in 1900. And this is an actual from life portrait of Theodore Roosevelt in his Rough Riders uniform, taken in 1898. And this in front of me here is a manual from the state of New York for the state legislature for the year 1900. This is again out of our archives, and it's actually a manual that was used when Roosevelt was governor of the state of New York. And here's a nice rendition of Roosevelt, pen and ink. But this is probably the most interesting thing. People smoked, and obviously the victory in the Spanish-American War was something that made Cuban cigars quite prevalent in America, more so than ever. And here's an actual cigar box dated 1899. You can tell it's 1899 because it has TR, the real American, on it, but it also has in the front, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but it says Governors. This is his cigar box, the cigars that were sold to the people when he was governor of the state of New York. This would be dated 1899, 1900. And inside, which can't be read, it says TR, Mild Havana. This is a stereoscopic viewer. Stereoscopic viewers were used by folks at home before the advent of radio and certainly before TV. And a card was placed on the back of it, and you kind of adjusted the position of the slide so that you could see the picture that was placed here in a unique fashion, 3 dimensions. So if you were to look through this tonight, and I invite you all to do that, this is an actual stereoscopic viewer, by the way, from 1900. Okay, so I ask you not to touch it, but if you just peek through there, you'll get a 3-dimensional view of none other than the victors in the election in 1900, McKinley and Bryan, in 3-dimensional. Now, that's what you call hands-on history. Okay, and on this side is a song sheet from the 1900 campaign, and this song was written by Will Hardy. And it shows both McKinley and Roosevelt and Stevenson and Bryan with a wonderful, spectacular 45-star flag. And if you look at the price for the song sheet itself, it's 50 cents. Okay? And here's some interesting campaign pieces I hope the camera can pick up. Here's some actual items, again, from this is an actual item from the 1900 campaign, as is the stereoscopic viewer, and as we move down chronologically. Here is one of those campaign pins that you were able to see on display. Here's an actual campaign pin that has the full dinner pail motif, the exact one that we talked about up there. And here's the other one on a blue background. And this one has, if you look very closely, you'll see Teddy Roosevelt has a very distinguished monocle on, and with a string attached to it. And of course, here's Roosevelt and McKinley pictured again on a gold background button, symbolizing their support of the gold standard. And the item in the middle is interesting, because this is an actual unused ticket to the Republican National Convention in June of 1900 that nominated McKinley and Roosevelt. Down below is a silver dollar from 1900, an uncirculated condition. And this one is meant to show the connection between the Democratic Party and silver dollars, unlimited coinage of silvers in a ratio of 16:1, and 2 wonderful, wonderful Bryan and Stevenson campaign buttons, both with silver backgrounds. Again, this is to associate that with the 16:1 ratio of gold to silver. And the last genuine kind campaign item I have to share with you tonight is probably one of the finest examples of a McKinley and Roosevelt campaign poster from 1900. And this came out of one of the most famous political collections in the United States, and it's here tonight, thank God, so we can all appreciate it. And it shows clearly McKinley and Roosevelt, and again that theme of one country, one flag, prosperity at home, and prestige abroad. And I want to extend my thanks to the folks that lent items for this display. My thanks to the Historical Society for maintaining excellent archival material in terms of this stuff. And my thanks to the Historical Society also for its acquisition of different things along the way. And of course, my continued thanks to the Museum of American Political Life for their help and assistance in compiling the necessary information that's necessary to do a report of this nature and style. And that concludes my talk on the 1900 Full Dinner Pail campaign. And I'll just ask you if you have any questions at this time. Anyone have any questions? Okay. Yeah.
The building where he was shot, was
Yes.
that in the United States or was that in Chicago?
That's in Buffalo. That's in Buffalo. Yeah. Yeah, that's in Buffalo. And interestingly enough, I looked for this, and I don't mind saying this on camera, but I looked in the Mamaroneck Historical Society archives is an actual paper from the day of September the 6th, 1901, that was donated to the society. I have to find it. It's somewhere in our archives that shows that President McKinley had been assassinated, shot rather, and had been shot and was in critical condition and wasn't expected to live. And I need to get my hands on that, so if you bear with me, I'll hopefully have it. By the way, some of this stuff that you see here will be on extended loan to the Historical Society for a period of time. The display area in the public library in Mamaroneck that we graciously have upstairs in the library will be changing. And what I want to say to you folks here tonight and to the folks at home is that the real millennium doesn't begin until January 1st, 2001. The real turn of the century doesn't begin until January 1st, 2001. So technically, when this campaign happened in 1900, it was the last year of the 19th century. So our century will begin again. So I thought it would be appropriate that we do a turn of the century display in the Mamaroneck Library, and that will be coming in the next month to 6 weeks, just in time for the change of the century. And I hope you all enjoy that, because some of these items that you see here will be on display at that time. And will be on extended loan to the society. Other things have to go back, and I know you'll understand that. But are there any questions about the talk tonight? Yes?
The Western miners, those who mine silver and gold in Wyoming and Montana and California, backed Julian Bryan.
Oh, 100%.
Because he was a silver man.
Right.
And they were silver producers.
Right.
And they were once controlled by the Boston banks.
Right.
But they wanted to break loose from the control of the banks, and they wanted Bryan in. Unfortunately.
Well, Bryan actually made an interesting foray to the east. Somewhere in the middle of the campaign, he cast caution aside, shall we say. He came to New York in the bullish areas of the stock market and everything else, and he actually began to preach. He didn't talk too much about the silver standard, though. He talked about imperialism. This is what he chose to talk about in New York. But he did try to bring his campaign to the east as well.
I have some data from my granduncle, Marcus Daly, who created the Anaconda Copper Company, and he backed Julius Bryan, and he gave like $300,000 to the campaign.
Wow.
And then he died in 1900.
Wow, that's
Or
a
1901.
that's a sizable amount of money for the 1900 campaign.
He had it. But there's a connection there, and I have some data on that if you like it.
It's always welcome.
Brochure from Anaconda about it, and about the campaign.
If nothing else, make us some good copies.
Well, I have copies.
Okay. I'd appreciate that. Anyone else? Well, that concludes our talk this evening. And of course, my last parting commentary to each and every one of you here and at home is no matter who it is that you may support in the campaign in 1900 or who you may support in the election of 2000, please come out and vote. It's your civic responsibility, and we certainly would love to see voter turnout increase. Please get involved. It's your democracy. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.